Hello everyone, welcome to the How to Ace VCE ATAR Notes lecture. My name is Sunny. I'm really excited to be delivering this lecture to you all today and hope that you find it really helpful in terms of getting some good study tips as well as understanding how the ATAR study score and aggregate system works. We'll be covering all of that today in really quick succession. We only have an hour's long session, so I'll be going through everything quite quickly. And without further ado, let's get started. So you can follow along on the bottom bar where we're up to, but as you can see, we're covering a lot today. So please also utilize the live chat Q&A. As we go along, I'll be answering questions in the live chat live over the duration of the session. So, first of all, let's start with a little bit of information about myself. As a student, I completed VCE in 2021 and I was college dux of my school with an ATAR of 96.70. So, I received a study score of 47 in legal studies, which was my highest, and 40 plus for literature, English language, further maths, and psychology. And I'm currently studying a Bachelor of Paramedicine course at Monash University. Firstly, I'd like to debunk some of the common VC phrases that you likely hear or things that you might actually say yourself. Number one is year 12 will be the hardest year of your life. I have this one highlighted basically to say that it doesn't have to be. If you study effectively and you set really good study habits and map out your study, it does not have to be. I personally had heaps of free time during year 12, and my experience was that I found when you get to university, it actually gets a little bit harder. So year 12 is giving you a good chance to set good habits that are going to help you out later on in life, and I urge you to take advantage of that. Um, with the following two statements, you don't have to study a ridiculously high number of hours every day. It's not all about study. It is important to take time off for yourself, have days off, days where you just relax and sit back. Um, Breaks are needed in order to avoid burnout. And if you've never experienced burnout personally, you couldn't really know how awful it is. It's quite common to see students getting sick because their immune system is weak, and being completely not only just losing motivation, but losing their ability to remember and retain information all of a sudden tends to happen. And this is absolutely the one thing you need to avoid during year 12 is burnout. Your your ATAR is just a number and doesn't define you. I'd like to say that I don't want it to sound harsh, but your ATAR is very, very important so that you can get into the course that you want to get into and have those options. Obviously, going through an alternate pathway to get into the course that you want to do can take that extra bit of time. And also, just feeling disappointed in yourself is something that I wouldn't wish upon anyone over their year 12 result. So I just encourage you to work your hardest this year and take the time, like with regards to the last statement, take the time to decide what suits you. It's better to take a long time to decide than to get into a course at uni, realize that you don't really like it, and have to transfer later on with, some wasted time and wasted uni fees. Do take your time to make a decision about what course you're interested in. Okay, so the first little bit that we're going to cover is with regards to our study tips, what sort of mindset you should aim for, and how you can organize your study better. And then we'll progress into looking how ATAR and study scores work. So I like to start with this quote: whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. It is a very simple quote, but I just like to point out its importance. It's all about your mindset, basically. A student that thinks it's going to be difficult, but I can get to this result, and here is XYZ that I need to do to get the result that I want, will succeed. Whereas a student Even, if you're quite smart, but you have low self-esteem, and you think you won't do well, chances are you won't because you don't believe in yourself. So I want to stress as part of this that everyone can get a high score in VCE, and it's all about consistent hard work. It's not about how naturally smart you are. The VCE system is already set up to reward those that spend a long, consistent amount of time learning the content, doing practice questions and practice exams. It is set up in that way, and every student who puts in consistent hard work will benefit. So please keep that in mind. A little mindset trick that you can do is whenever you get homework set, to do it on the same night, um, rather than waiting for the night before. It will help with content consolidation as well because you've just learned that bit of content in class. So if you do your homework ASAP, it will not only be higher quality, but it will also help you to consolidate new content. That's just a really good habit you can get into, and you will have your Thursday to Friday nights, you'll have those free. And this is a little trick that I used to practice. So, setting goals is also important. Not only short term goals, but long term goals as well. Ultimately, keeping it realistic as well. The ATAR that you are aiming for can be your long term goal. What you want to do at uni, what you want to do when maybe you turn 18, those can be your long term goals to help motivate you throughout the year. But you need to have lots of short-term goals inside that you can easily tick off and progress towards that long-term goal in the meantime. So the ultimate goal that I retain that I think every student should have is to do as well as you can on every SAC and exam and see where it gets you. And when you don't do so well as you wanted or expected, not getting down on yourself, but because I have this attitude that I want to do as well as possible, how can I do better next time is the question you should be asking. What else can I add? What else can I change? What gaps do I need to fill to do better next time? And that is the best attitude to have when you don't give up, when you just keep chipping away. Over time, you will be closer and closer and potentially even surpassing those goals as long as you have this attitude. It doesn't happen straight away, but it happens over time. And if you don't have this attitude, it is highly unlikely that you'll get those high marks that you kind of want. So I really suggest having this attitude with regards to VC in year 12 in particular. Work with your teachers. Um, it's really bad to develop a me against them sort of attitude. If you don't like your teacher's teaching style, yes, there's nothing you can really do about that. There are additional supports like tutoring available that you can access in order to sort of, you know, uh, deal with that disadvantage because it doesn't work for you. But ultimately, you need to be working with your teachers. They can fill in content gaps, explain things you don't understand, give you extra work, extra practice exams. They really have access to a whole lot, and they want to help you succeed. Even if it's a strict teacher, even if they mark you down or set on Zacks, it's just the way that they think is better. Maybe they think it's better to put more pressure on you and mark you to what they think is an exam standard. There are a lot of teachers like that. Um, and it's important to understand that they're still doing it for your best interest. And if you don't work with your teacher, you miss out on those extra resources, extra content understanding, marking, extra work from you just because you gave it to them. So this is really important in year 12. Even if you don't get along with that teacher, really try to utilize them as much as possible. Next, we'll have a look at a bit about organization. So I never really liked study timetables. If you have one, you need to update it every single week because demands change. You have different assessments on different weeks. I prefer a nice and clear, very specific to-do list. I don't have to get all of this done tonight, but maybe like all the things I need to get done this week, and I keep adding things based on what I figure out I need to do after every class. Okay. So the to-do list I would bring to school, um, and I would fill in as new things pop up. I would have an extra to do section if I had like more time. And I found this to be more effective and more flexible. So a bad to-do list, we can see an example here is quite funny, doesn't specify how these subjects need to be revised. Um, it's too vague. It's not actually doable, if that makes sense. And it's got an unrealistic long-term goal at the bottom. And this isn't something you'll just be able to cross off as you go week by week. Now, a good to-do list should be really specific in terms of what it says needs to be done. For example, for the legal studies revision, summarizing class notes from Tuesday has been set, and for the specialist SAC, revision questions, specifically which ones. So this is that SAC prep. Um, so this is the level of detail you want to aim to go into because these goals are easy to tick off, and that will increase your motivation. You'll feel really happy that, I did this task that I'd set for myself. And it makes it easier the more things you tick off to keep going. Now, with regards to distractions, you need to separate your study spaces from the spaces where you don't study. When you study, focus on studying only. No phone, no social media, no distractions, quiet, just studying. You'll get so much more done and the quality of your work will be so much better. Similarly, when you're relaxing, never try to do some schoolwork at the same time, revise something at the same time. You need to fully study, you need to fully relax, especially half relaxing stresses a lot of students out. I knew many students during year 12 that pretty much half studied all the time and half relaxed all the time, uh, going into burnout, even though to me it seemed you didn't even study that much or get that much done this whole year due to not separating studying and relaxing. If you separate the two, you will have a lot more free time just simply by getting things done. Okay, so putting your phone away, getting one of those apps that locks your phone, um, finding a quiet environment. If it's not great at home, doing it in the year 12 area at school or the library, or even if you live next to a uni, go to a uni library. Like there's lots of options to make sure you can ensure this. And you'll have a higher quality of work and better use of your study sessions. Having routines is also crucial during VCE. I really want to stress if you're already in year 12, it's really the time to set one. Doesn't happen straight away, but once you keep sticking to a routine you've set for yourself, like never failing to complete your to-do list, always studying on certain days every week. Once you get into a groove of it, you'll find it becomes effortless. This is just something that you go to do because you always do it. And that's the self discipline that you need this year to do well in year 12. So for me personally, I managed to, I had to travel about an hour to school every day and back. I had extracurriculars and hobbies throughout the year that I actively engaged in. I hung out with friends and I worked two casual jobs. But with a set routine, it was easy to work VC around my life, I would say. The only times it got stressful was when there was a lot of SACs piled up or closer to exam period. Otherwise, throughout the year, I found it really easy to have tons of free time and don't get stressed out. And adapting these demands as well, like during the busy SAC period or in the lead up to exams. Like I stopped working, for example, because it was important at the time to take that break to focus on study. And I would study for at least an hour when I got home every day, but more often 3 or 4 hours. I would take a break when I got back from school and then I would get into studying. I always kept Fridays after school and Sundays completely free and never did anything on those days. I never studied late because of the way I had it laid out. And if I planned to have a study day, I would go and start studying as soon as I woke up and got ready and had my breakfast, except prior to exams, just due to the fact that some exams are very long. I would do them under time conditions, and if it dragged out later, um, for a 2.5 hour or 3 hour exam, I wouldn't go to bed until I finished that exam. Um, and I did, Saturday was my main big study day. I would spend most of that day studying and reward myself by keeping Sunday completely empty. So I still had lots of time for everything that I wanted to do. And it was really easy to stick to. Personally, my routines were formed in year 11. So by the time I hit year 12, I just had to ease back into it during the summer. Probably found that it took me about a month to get used to having consistent study habits. And after that, it was quite easy. So here's just a suggested 2 hour sort of study day you can have a look at. I feel like it's quite realistic, but you may need to adapt it for when you need more than 2 hours of study. We'll look at some study tips now as well. So the most important thing, as I mentioned, is consistent hard work and holding yourself accountable. If you give yourself days off when you shouldn't, just because you feel lazy or there's something you want to do a little more, you don't have your long-term goals in sight. If VC is important to you and ATAR is important to you, nothing is going to happen if you make excuses and you don't do what needs to be done. So find a system that works for you, um, and hold yourself accountable. So we have an example of a system here. The night before every class, preparing what's going to be done in class, reading the relevant textbook chapter so you're slightly ahead, and you can understand the content better. I personally always did this. It doesn't take very long and it really helps. During the class, taking down notes. I would use the whole class to take notes as much as I could, so I never really had to do it at home. Saved me a lot of time. Later that night, potentially making a shorter summary and doing practice questions. Really, practice questions should be done every time you do a new topic because it's similar to exam format. And the day after class, doing the assigned homework without looking at the notes because hopefully you've had some time to consolidate them. Some extra tips is if you do a study to-do list, I do recommend writing it down, having it handwritten, have that satisfaction from ticking things off and be able to take it with you and just add things as you're at school. Um, and when you write your to-do list, don't stop until you have fully finished. It doesn't take very long. If you realize your list was unreasonable when you've just started doing this, make some alterations accordingly. Don't just stop doing it completely. You can create a bullet journal in your book for each month to practice accountability. And this would be where you would just tick off each day that you studied. Um, of course, you can mark your days off as well, and you can add weekends as well. So, you can tick it if you studied on a day that you were supposed to have off, but you also want to have all the days that you expect yourself to study always ticked, okay? So think of some kind of delayed reward that you can give yourself if, say, for the whole month, you stuck perfectly to your bullet journal and studied on the days that you were meant to. It's going to make it so much easier for you to have a study routine by encouraging positive reinforcement and giving yourself a reward. If it isn't something you can give yourself, like a special day off that you plan, for example, you can think of your own reward, or you can have a chat with your parents about something little that could be used to reward your good study habits. Maybe you can come to an agreement. I think this is a really motivating strategy. In terms of self-discipline, I already mentioned this is really, really important. Only once you are in a good habit and easily sticking to a study routine, only after that should you be easier on yourself, where you feel, oh, maybe I'm a little bit tired, I'll give myself the night off. Not before it becomes easy, though. So the minimum is, I would say, at least 4 weeks where you're making that conscious effort, and you're able to do that completely. After that, you can let yourself off the hook a little bit more. Study in the ways that are effective for you. There's heaps of ideas I've attached here. Ultimately, everyone's style of learning and retaining information the best is different, and it is okay to acknowledge that. Don't just ask people how they study expecting it's going to work for you. You can try it, but ultimately do what works best. For me, I really remembered best from writing things down, actually writing things down. It was a time consuming method, but I found that that's what worked for me. A lot of people have auditory memory, so hearing things, hearing teachers teach, watching videos is helpful for a lot of students as well, just as some examples. And some high achieving students don't even write notes in year 11 or 12, and this is standard. If you have a different learning style, it may work for you as well. But my number one piece of advice is that you need to understand everything and memorize nothing as much as possible. There will be some things in every subject that do need to be rote learned, but there won't be many of those. So it's important to learn things to the point that they just make sense. When you hear about a concept, you can start to talk about it and explain it. And that way you will never forget it, and you won't have that mental strain of having to pack so much information into your head. I also recommend spaced repetition. So if we have a look at this, information needs to be revised more than once. And the more you revise it, the further apart these revision sessions will get. So, for example, if for one topic, uh, I learned it that day, the topic that was covered in school, I came back to it 1 week later, then 2 weeks later, then 4 weeks later, 2 months later. So hopefully that makes sense, because science has shown if you do not have spaced revision, you will not retain all of the information, and you inevitably have to learn information all over again when you finally do come back to it. And the longer that you haven't revised it for, the more you have forgotten. So spaced repetition actually saves a bunch of time, because at some stage you get to just reading over, reviewing things that you actually do remember, and just repeating that information to yourself, and it's become effortless and it takes no time. Um, it's just another idea, like you can highlight in different colors areas that you're confident in, that need some revision, and that you completely haven't gotten to or really need help with, for example. Um, and ultimately, I want to say you should focus on active recall. Don't focus on putting things in your brain. Mind maps is a really good activity. Take a concept and put down everything you know about it, then fact check and see what you should add to it. Because on the exam, you will only have access to active recall. Reinforce content in different ways. So it shouldn't be just one thing you use to learn, like your notes and reading over them and trying to remember them. But it should be a combination of different things depending on what works for you. So an example would be, let's say one student attends tutoring classes, teaches their friends, does practice questions. Everyone should be doing practice questions, really. Making a podcast they can listen to later. So for those with auditory memory, this is amazing. Just record yourself delivering the content and talking about the content, and you can listen back to it, even like maybe as you're going to sleep or getting to school. You can watch videos as well. So that's just an example of, say, one student's ways that they're going to reinforce content. So try to plan that for yourself as well, and make sure you have more than one there. Do practice questions and practice exams as well as part of that. This is the number one way you can apply and test your knowledge. Start doing this early on in the year, not late towards the year. As you study concepts, go and find practice questions that relate to them, especially those from past exams. It not only helps to improve your understanding of the content, but they also directly preparing you for SACs and the exam, because it is the same format. And I don't know if I need to say it, but it's self-explanatory. Like if you're doing English subjects, that would be practice essays. Um, but whenever you learn anything new or whenever you are revisiting an old topic, do practice questions. Do as many practice exams for each of your subjects as you actually can. Don't leave it for that last 3 weeks. Everyone scrambles to get ready for all of their exams because you will not get that many done. Do these under timed conditions if you are completing them in full later on when you've learned all of your content for the year. Under time conditions, and mark yourself using examiners' reports as well as feedback wherever you miss a mark. Make sure you would never make that mistake again. You fully understand how the question should have been answered, why the option that you chose was wrong. Okay, so don't disregard the importance of this. If you do lots of practice exams, it becomes really easy to do the actual exam because you don't really get anything unexpected. Beware of writing notes. Never write notes that you haven't actually learned the content for yet. That Never put something down that you don't already understand and know because you get zero benefit from doing that. So first learn and understand the information, then start writing some notes and move like that so you actually get utility from it and you actually start to remember the information that you've put down. After a section of notes, always test yourself and see if you remember what you've written down. That's a really good way to learn content just as you complete your notes. Write them in a way that you can use for revision and ultimately the end of your exam. I like to have longer notes for each little subtopic learned in school and then have summary notes towards the end of the whole bigger concept. Um, so information overload is a serious problem for year 12 students. Work closely with your study design and break it down. Don't learn things that won't be assessed or will be assessed in very little detail. Have the study design printed out and understand exactly in how much detail and what it is you need to know. Looking at practice exam questions helps with this. You can also see how much certain things pop up and how many marks are given for certain kinds of questions based on certain dot points. So only know what you have to know. This is how you can find them. You can Google the name of your subject, VCE study design. Write your notes based on the study design, not on your textbook. Humanities and sciences subjects in particular have so much irrelevant, or let's just say extra information in them. I find I find that the ATAR notes products are very concise when it comes to just giving you the really relevant information. Um, so the Ed Unlimited and ATAR Notes publications and so on, but general textbooks that you're going to use in school, especially for sciences, humanities, way too long. There's so much information there. It is mostly to help you and give you more information to understand everything and if you're interested as well. So work with your study design instead. Tells you exactly what you need to know for the exam. And you can use it to check yourself and what you know versus what you need to revise. I wouldn't even say nearly all. I would say all high achievers would be familiar with the study design I expect because that's how they prepared so well for their exams. Just an example of what a study design looks like, but I'm sure you have seen it even in year 11. Um, and it's just showing you key knowledge, what you need to know, and then there will be a key skills section on the end. Depending on the subject, it may be the key skills section may be detailing what kinds of questions you need to be able to answer based on the key knowledge dot points. That's how it usually is. Okay. So it's just an idea about having frameworks to store information to make it a lot easier for yourself. This is just back to spaced repetition. I've recommended something you can look up to help you. I really recommend watching these YouTube videos. Look up spaced repetition and Kami on YouTube. Will really help you. Obviously, medical students have to study some very difficult information. So, for high school students, these are huge life hacks if you don't know about them. But as part of succeeding this year, you need to be ahead, and you won't be ahead if you don't retain the information you learned. If you're in term three and you couldn't do an exam on the things you learned for your subject in term one and term two, the hopes of getting that 90 plus ATAR are very minuscule. So look into space repetition. This is just showing you that if you don't review information um, after you learn it, how quickly you lose it. But if you review it, how quickly it goes back up, and you don't have to learn a lot of it again because a lot of it is already in your head, and then how you can space the newly learned information out more and more until you probably will almost forget nothing. So that would be the aim. Um, my number one key to success as well on the topic of study tips now, that you need to be really consistent, and consistent studying over a longer period of time will make the most difference. I think I've made that pretty clear. But you also want to develop those skills of self-discipline, and this is only something you can gain from. These are things that are some extra study tips that would benefit all students. Feel free to have a look. I feel like a lot of them are obvious, but sometimes it's important to remember what you need to do for yourself. Now we're going to look at ATAR scaling and prerequisites for our second half of the session. So we'll be looking at ATAR, aggregate scores, study scores, and subject scaling. This is where you might be wanting to ask a bit more questions, utilize the live chat a little bit more if something's not clear, because we don't have that much time. So in VCE, effort amounts to results. I think I've made my position quite clear, but there are no ways to cheat it. You can't cheat your study score because you chose your subject because it's going to get scaled up. It doesn't matter. And I'll explain more what I mean by that. So your ATAR score is a rank. You're ranked in comparison to all of the other students. It's not a score out of 100. It compares you to the rest of the students in year 12 in all of Australia. Despite having different systems, ATAR is Australia-wide. So for example, if you got 95, you beat 95% of students. If you got an ATAR of 10, it means 90% of students got more than you. And of course, your ATAR is calculated from your aggregate score. This is where some students start to get a bit lost. This is kind of like the total score of all of your subjects. So they take the sum of all of your scaled study scores to calculate this aggregate. What does that consist of? A student's top English subject, because everyone has to do at least one English subject, their next three highest scores, so English must be in the top 4, and these 4 subjects will make up 90% of your study score, okay? And if you're taking a 5th subject and or a 6th subject, your 5th and 6th lowest scaled scores become only 10% of your ATAR, okay? So your top 4 subjects, including one of them has to be an English subject, make up 90% of your what's going to be your ATAR essentially from your aggregate. And a 5th and 6th subject, the lowest scores they take, will only make 10%. So you're at a huge advantage by the system because it does allow you to mess up at a subject. Okay. For example, let's see how aggregate is calculated. As we can see, all of these have been added up, the top 4 subject scores as they are, because the 5th and 6th subject only make up 10% of your aggregate and therefore your ATAR. They've been divided by 10. So we can see the decimals there. So they have very little effect. So to calculate your ATAR, as we said, ATAR ranks you. Your aggregate is then compared to everyone else's aggregate. So if you were better than 50% of students, right stack in the middle, you would get an ATAR of 50. So the ATAR system is very competitive. You can find these kinds of things online, but there is an estimate for what type of aggregate score would lead to what ATAR. So you can use this. It is quite accurate. This is basically how ATAR calculators work based on this system of aggregates and what ATAR it's likely to lead to. So how do we get study scores? We know it's a score from 1 to 50 for a particular subject. Surely everyone knows that. So it isn't a mark out of 50. If you got a 40, it doesn't mean your mark was an 80%. Chances are it's probably a lot better, or at least a little bit better than an 80% if you got a 40, because it works as a standard distribution bell curve, which if you're doing any math subject would make a lot of sense, but we'll still have a look at what we mean by that. Because it's on a standard distribution bell curve, the way that the study score works, the average raw score for every subject is 30. So a 25 in a subject is below average. A 30 is the very average, which is the median score, okay? So this is the standard distribution bell curve. You can look this up online to make more sense of it, but all students are right in the middle in the 50% have a study score of 30, okay? So because it uses standard deviations, we can see that means there's less students congregating at the upper ends of a really low study score or also a very high study score. So for example, to get a study score of 45 plus in your specific subject, you would need to be in the top 2% of students, which is very, very difficult. It would be the same for a study score of 5 or less. You would need to be in the 2% of students, okay? This is for raw study scores. This is before scaling, just to clarify that. And a study score of 40%, of 40 plus, sorry, only about 9% of students get for a subject. So we can see how competitive it is. To make it specific to your subject and get a bit more accurate numbers, you can search Google for grade distributions. And I've got an example here of how it's all calculated, but you can find information online, grade distributions for each year's exam. For example, for this whole calculation, we found that to get a 40 on that year's exam, you only needed around 76% on the exam that year. So how are study scores calculated? So SACs and exams are assigned a graded assessment. For most subjects, there's only one exam. So your graded assessment 1 is your SAC marks for the first half of the year, of the school year. And then graded assessment 2 is your SAC marks for the second half of the school year. Graded assessment 3 would be your exam. And it usually is that your SAC marks over the year contribute 50% to your study score for that subject, and your end of year exam contributes 50% to your study score as well. To make this more specific, they actually assign a letter grade to each graded assessment, and you will see this in your final transcript when you get your ATAR. And that's basically how it's done. For different subjects, it can vary. When I did maths, SACs were only worth 33.33%. And then there was 2 exams and it was worth 66.66%. So just know how it's graded. An A plus only means you're in the top 10. So if you get an A plus in your final end of year transcript on the exam, it means you could be anywhere in that 40 plus range or even below 40. if your subject got scaled down. Remember, we just looked at the standard distribution curve. A study score of 40 plus is 9% of students. So an A plus means you're in that top 10% most likely. So you can get a low A or a high A depending on how well other students did that year. And that makes an impact on your study score, a huge impact. Now, the exam is more important to make everything more equal across schools. So what they do is they actually look at how you did on the exam much, much, much more. And if you did really well on the exam and you had a strict teacher and your stats were marked down, your exam score will significantly bump your study score up. So you're not at a disadvantage. Additionally, once you have your study scores, they get scaled. This aims to make subjects even. How fair it is, we won't discuss. It is just one of those things that we have in our system. Okay. So scaling reflects how competitive a subject is, not how difficult. They want to remove the stigma around that term. So how competitive a subject is gets measured by how well students that are taking that subject during school perform in their other subjects. So if we take the example of specialist maths versus PE, let's imagine that students that take specialist maths, all of those students that take PE as well, they have a tendency to do better in PE and get higher marks because specialist maths is very difficult. That's why specialist maths is getting scaled up based on that performance to try to make everything more equal. Okay. Um, Basically, the whole idea is to equalize subjects. It's not rewarding you or punishing you. The idea is it is actually supposed to be harder to do well in a subject that gets scaled up significantly. A lot of people choose some of these subjects in year 10, go into year 11, and they realize they really struggle with the subject, and it doesn't matter, it's going to get scaled up, but they're really struggling. That's not everyone, of course, but you should never choose subjects just because you think, oh, it's going to get scaled up, or I'm not going to choose it because it's going to get scaled down. Even if you do a subject that gets scaled down, but you get a really high study score in it, a raw study score, scaling stops affecting almost completely. It will be a decimal place that you get scaled down. Um, Therefore, it makes it just as hard to get a scaled score of 45 in specialist as it is to get a scaled score of 45 in further because of the competitiveness involved in those subjects. Okay. Um, so this is basically something that you just need to completely disregard and focus on doing well in your subject because it has no effect, really. So your raw study scores get taken and they will get scaled based on the competitiveness of the subject that we've just described and discussed. And your aggregate is calculated off your scaled study scores. As we said, the top 4 subjects, including English, where you had the highest study scores, become your 90% of your aggregate and contribute to your ATAR, and 10% of your 5th and 6th subjects in total. And then your ATAR is calculated. So importantly, um, as I mentioned before, do not pick subjects because they scale up or refrain from picking subjects because they scale down. Again, what I wanted to say, when you do better in a subject, scaling stops affecting you. See here, this student got a raw score of 42 in English. Scaling still affected them, but their scaled score was only 0.5 lower. Okay? Psychology usually gets scaled down by about 2 marks, but the student got a raw 48 and scaling stopped affecting their mark because of that. It became 47.96. We see the same here for PE. Um, we see also that when you do well in a subject that gets scaled up heaps, because your raw score is already so high, scaling stops having a significant effect. And now physics only got scaled up 1.75 marks. Okay. So I just want to address that. SAC moderation we'll chat about next. This is where it gets a little bit more complicated. Basically, um, it's not your actual SAC marks from throughout the year. This is an example of Vika sending you your results. Your SAC marks get altered a little bit depending on how well your school, your cohort, does on the exam for that subject and rankings within the class. Okay, so why do they do this? So imagine you write a great English essay, you feel really happy, and you get a B. But it turns out you have a strict teacher, and B was the best mark in your year level. So your other friend at a different school gets an A for writing a pretty poor essay because their teacher is a really easy marker. So this helps to bridge the gap between different teachers, different qualities of teaching. Um, it makes sure that having a strict teacher doesn't affect you, nor does having a lenient teacher really. It's all about your own skill, and it bridges the gap, I would say, between public and private schools as well, in that sense. So it is quite fair that by looking at how your cohort did as a whole, your SAC marks or everyone's in your class are getting moderated to make it more fair. If everyone did badly on the exam because you had a lenient teacher, of course, it would then make sense that your marks should not stay A's, A pluses. But if you're a student that is an exception and you did really well on the exam as well, despite having a lenient teacher and getting A's all year, but you smash the exam, this won't affect you. VCA does make it fair. That was my experience. I had lenient teachers and I did well on the exam. My cohort did not. Um, the ATAR that came back for me and the study scores were completely fair. And I felt that this did not affect me. So please don't worry about it. But know that it doesn't matter if you have a strict teacher or a lenient teacher, everything is meant to be fair in the end. We see an example of that. School A had really high SAC marks, but had a really low exam mark. What would happen? Their SAC moderation, their SAC marks are going to go down based on their exam performance. Similarly, a school that scored poor marks on their SACs but had a really higher average exam mark, their SACs will be moderated up and their study scores will be higher. This is just an example about how we imagine it all works. It's not how it exactly happens. And then rankings within your school for a subject are basically how your SAC scores actually get moderated, the actual process. So your ranking is where you're ranked in your year level at school, where you're compared to everyone else at your school based on everyone's SAC scores. So it's comparing how well each student is doing in that subject. So for example, imagine you have the second best average SAC score throughout the year, and that would make your ranking number 2. If yours was the best, it would be number 1. So let's imagine that there's only 5 students doing a subject for our example. And we can see here that your SAC scores get moderated. So the person that had the best SAC ranking will still get the best SAC scores, even if the moderation makes everything go down because everyone can do as well in the exam. If you were number 1 student when it came to SACs, you still get the highest moderated SAC score. So it makes it fair. So Bob got an average SAC score of 90% and an exam score of only 70. Okay. But then you, who were number 2, you had an average SAC score of 80% and an exam score of 95%. So to moderate Bob's SAC score, really, he did a lot worse on the exam, but he still gets a moderated SAC score of 95% from you, from us, just because he had a high average SAC score throughout the year. And that makes it fair. Whereas you, who gotten 95% on the exam, your moderated SAC score is only 85% because it takes Bill's exam score and that becomes your moderated SAC score as the student that is ranked number 2. So I will say it is quite important. It does have some effect, and you should aim to be high in the SAC rankings for your subjects as much as possible. A lot of teachers don't disclose the SAC rankings. Some do. It's purely up to them. Um, and your exam score still counts as your exam score, and nothing happens there. It counts towards your study score. It doesn't get, it doesn't go through SAC moderation based on this ranking. That's just for your SAC score. As we can see from the example, it's probably going to stay very similar to what it already was. Okay. Um, so you want to do as well as you can on every SAC so you can get a good ranking because that's very important, and you can get a really good first half of your aggregate if your SACs are worth 50% for a subject, and you really want the exam to go well because even if your SACs were lower, like we said, but your exam score was a lot higher, that's going to bump up your SAC score as well and will be reflected in your study score. So the exam is most important, but all year is very important in year 12. We can see some examples of what kind of ATARs you would get with certain scores. In this example, we see a study score of 30 for everything coming out. These are never 100% accurate, but coming out with an ATAR of 73.75, which is not bad. So as you can see, realistically, this is the kind of scores that would lead to that sort of ATAR. So this is almost right on average, this 73, because all the raw scores are 30. So this student did completely average in each subject, was top 50% in each subject. Raw scores of 35, with some of these subjects getting scaled up quite a bit, have led to an ATAR of 87.95. Raw scores of 40 in everything led to an ATAR quite similar to mine. And a 99 was study scores of 45 across the board, which is a quite realistic example. And remember, 45 to 50, that's only 2% of students for the subject. So that would be quite difficult. My other tip is to only worry about what you can control. Don't get upset too much this year. Focus on your own results and how much effort you put in. Examples of things that you can control is your performances on your SAC and your exam, at least how prepared you are, knowing that you did your best and you did your hardest to prepare, and having that flexibility to, if it didn't work out, what can I do different next time? That's really important. But you can't control any of these things like your ranking, your subject scaling, how your SACs will be moderated because of the school that you're in, or your aggregate in your ATAR. Just let go of these things completely. So have that attitude that I had in year 12. Do as well as you can on every assessment and especially the exam to see what you can get. And I didn't have a specific goal in sight for myself as well. I didn't think like I need this ATAR. It needs to be above 90. All I had in mind was the ATAR that I needed to get into my course, which at the time was significantly lower than what I ended up getting. But I just worked for that goal, and I just made sure I wouldn't have any uncertainty as to whether I would get that ATAR or not. I just felt really confident that would be high enough for me to get in. And just by doing my best, I ended up getting a study scores and an ATAR that were a lot higher than what I expected or needed, and just being really happy with that. And it does happen to a lot of students that are motivated throughout the year. You can really surprise yourself. So overall, let's summarize how we said everything works. complete SACs at school and receive a SAC ranking based on that. You do the exam based on exam performance of your entire year level doing that subject, and your SAC ranking. Your SAC results are altered or moderated. This only affects, you know, the percentage of your study score. Usually it's 50% for that subject. Oh, that is composed of your SAC scores. Your exam score doesn't change. Okay, that still remains the other 50%. You get a raw study score from 1 to 50 for each subject based on those moderated SAC results and your normal exam results. Okay, not altered. And then raw study scores are scaled based on the competitiveness of the subject. Your aggregate is calculated, revising again what it's composed of, but I'm sure everyone remembers by now. And then your ATAR is calculated off your aggregate. That's all. That's we've covered everything today. I just wanted to say thank you guys for coming along and wish you luck for the rest of the year.